There is magic in the mountains. Something about mountains make my spirit soar. And in ancient Near Eastern culture, but I would argue probably every culture, mountains are uniquely holy places. They touch the heavens. They become the place where earth and heaven meet. And so it is that to say, let us go to the mountain, is to go to the very dwelling place of God. And we hear that throughout our scripture again and again and again. Moses receives the 10 Commandments on a mountain. Moses goes again and again up on the mountain to deliberate with God about how terrible and annoying the people are. And then bring back down off the mountain glimpses of God's glory. The mountain shines in Israel when God is dwelling there. And you might recall when Moses comes down off the mountain, what is true? I'm assuming this means, his face shines with that glimpse of glory that he saw. And Israel's reaction to that is, cover that up. That's scary stuff. Right? Because it is scary to find your life exactly. Scary stuff. To find yourself in the hands of the living God. A couple weeks ago in the newsletter, I quoted a piece from C.S. Lewis who implies that it's scary when we come to worship and actual worship happens. Because so often what we're coming to is a bit of free symphony and a collection of platitudes. And that domesticated experience is what we're really after. But on the mountain, God is on the loose, and no domestication can happen. The hymn text that we read, that we will sing later, is for what liturgical Sunday? Thank you. I'm glad you picked up on that. The part where it said transfigured and complete was probably a big tell, even if you didn't know the scriptural story that is happening there. But as a quick reminder, we'll even get geographically physical about this. So the disciples and Jesus are all hanging out down in the valley, and then Jesus takes Peter and James and John, which are the inner core of the 12, who are themselves the inner core of the disciples following Jesus, and they go up the mountain. And what do we know about up on the top of the mountain? God's on the loose up there. Things outside of our control, things outside of our understanding happen up there. And so then Jesus starts glowing really bright or something like that. And usually once a year, pastors try to understand or pretend like they understand what that's supposed to mean, but we don't any more than Peter did, who, standing in a complete mix of awe and fear, says to the now having appeared Elijah, Moses, and Jesus, do you want us to build you like a booth or something? Right? And maybe it's that Peter's trying to hold on to an experience that he knows is going to slip away, because when you see God face to face on the top of the mountain, it always slips away when you go back down into the city. Or maybe it's he wants to figure out, can I package this and sell this somehow? We've done that too. But they go at Christ's bidding up the mountain, and they have what we will call a theophany, and God revealing God's self before them, in which they are reminded that the world is not nearly as mundane as they would like to imagine that it is. The world is pregnant with the miraculous power of God. And so the hymnist gives voice to that. Let us see here glimpses of your glory. Let us see here tokens that will tell us our faith is not in vain. In a very similar way, the prophet Isaiah speaks out to 7th century Israel and says, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord." Let us go there and let us hear again the instructions about what Zion is all about. Zion meaning home. God's vision for the world. And there we hear from the prophet Isaiah, word for word, by the way, the same text that you would find in Micah 4. About beating swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. A vision God has not for Israel, but for all the nations, all the peoples of the world. A vision pregnant with miraculous possibility. And we read it on a Sunday morning, the end of November, pregnant instead with turkey. I had a lot of turkey. And then we walk back into the world and we leave Isaiah's vision on the mountaintop. Why do we leave Isaiah's vision, Micah's vision, God's vision he gave to Micah and Isaiah on the mountaintop? Because it's not going to work, right? I mean, beating all our swords into plowshares, it's not practical. We'll make ourselves victims to the people who chose not to. And we have a deep and burning desire for the church to become relevant. So isn't it amazing that a church that receives the word of the Lord saying, beat your swords into plowshares and learn to make war no more, instead says, let's create just war doctrine. Nice, that's a nice vision, God, but it's not going to work. So we'll just figure out to kill people nicely. Right? In the New Interpreter's commentary on Isaiah, it begins with these words: do not turn wine into water. It's an allusion to the wedding at Cana where Jesus, when the wine has run out, it's actually one of my favorite stories because his mom says, do your thing. He says, it's not time yet. She says, do it. And so he turns the water into wine. And so often the church has been in the opposite emphasis, in a burning desire for relevance and a practical word in a practical world. We have turned our wine into water, demythologized the mountain, tried to aim for something far short of God's vision, because at least maybe in that we could be successful. Yesterday, in this very same sacred and holy place, we celebrated the life of Fran Kirk. Fran, we had the fun of playing the same prelude for yesterday's service that was played here in 1956 at Fran's ordination. Fran was ordained here to ministry, met Nancy here, whom he married, and that turned out pretty good. He was the assistant pastor here, and then the interim pastor, and then he took a pastorate in Washington, I think, after that, and went on to 20 years of pastorates, got his PhD in counseling and therapy, and 26 years of therapy and counseling services. Once he retired, he came back and worshiped here with us. I have from him words. He wrote these words about Christian funerals, and I want to read them to you on this idea of what it is when the church turns wine into water. Protestant churches, by and large, are unhappy with many practices that have developed in connection with the burial of the dead. Ministers often feel they are party to a semi-religious, semi-pagan service, caught in an atmosphere of gloom made worse by sentimental ditties vaguely baptized as music. I mean, write that on your door, folks. That's just good. This is the church's fault. If there are customs connected with the funeral service that are unrelated to the Christian faith, which I contend they are, it is in large measure because the church has abdicated its responsibility in these matters. I am asking to let the church lead, to give clear teaching on the matter. After all, the funeral director did not, in most cases, persuade people to perform in such a way. The truth is this: the church was silent, and the funeral director stepped into the void. The mountaintop is pregnant with divine possibility, but it is uncompromising in its vision for how God would order our lives, to the end of ordering all creation to be a place of justice, mercy, and peace. Shalom, wholeness. Christ transfigured and complete. The law and the prophets married in this flesh-born word. That's the vision God puts in front of us. That's what we're counting down time to, but it won't ever happen if we think it's too unrealistic to bear that truth into the world. If we domesticate and settle for less and make more relevant some human-sized vision God might be after. God invites us to blow up our imagination, to come up to the mountaintop and catch a glimpse of glory, and then with persistent passion carry that glory down into the world and never give up on the idea that peace on earth is a dream worth pursuing, not an ideal worth scoffing at. But if we abdicate that responsibility, it will never happen. And so when we pause in this time of Advent, in this time of preparation and waiting, this time that we are called to lean in to God's future, waiting over the horizon, the first instruction that we have to heed is to show up, to be willing to set aside the voices that crowd and clutter our day and show up to catch the glimpse of the world God sees in us. The potential God has faith exists in you and me and all our neighbors. And to bear that vision in our daily lives, proving by what we profess that we are walking God's way. This is the word of the Lord.